Rising air pollution crisis in the national capital, the Delhi government postponed the implementation of the odd-even car rationing scheme after the Supreme Court questioned the effectiveness of the plan amidst the prevailing situation. Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, what does the EV industry need to do at this point in time? Because, I understand it is quite laudable to have an EV vehicle, electronic vehicle as compared to a petrol vehicle, but there are impediments, there are problems when it comes to purchasing e-vehicles. Number one of those for people who drive four-wheelers is, of course, the cost. There have been some incentives which have been offered by the government, but they don't seem to be doing the motivation at this point in time. Diesel cars are still being sold. In fact, in the month of October, the number of diesel cars that were sold in our country is almost at par with the cars that were sold for petrol.
Yeah, even now, the difference between two cars of the same brand and the same make, one being electric and one being the internal combustion engine, there's at least a 5 lakh rupee difference, which means if you just convert it into the economics of it, you can buy 5,000 liters of petrol. So if you get a minimum of 15 kilometers per liter, you're getting 75,000 kilometers of free drive with the difference in the costing. So clearly the economics is still not there. And therefore the government really needs to do more to make sure that the economics is there. Just like if you look at solar, the solar energy production is cheaper than coal based electricity production, and therefore it makes natural economic sense to move over to solar, which is exactly what's happening. There is a explosion of solar generation that's happening because the economics works out. It's cheaper to generate solar energy, and the same way, if we can bring the EV economics to a level where it is cheaper to drive a EV vehicle, I think that's what is really needed. Now, in addition, obviously, there are the infrastructure issues about charging points and so on and so forth. Those they normally get solved once there is a demand in place. Obviously, it can also be treated as a chicken and egg problem that unless you can charge your car, why will you buy a car? But more or less, people are those who have bought EV vehicles are able to charge them at home. The challenge happens when you are living in an apartment complex and you don't have access to what kind of infrastructure you can set up at the parking lot of your apartment complex. And that's something that the RWs of the apartment complex have to get together and solve. And again, as I said, if there is a demand, the solutions around the infrastructure will start happening on its own. Where the government really needs to step in is, for example, if you look at Delhi, half of the GST being collected on cars is coming to the Delhi government, and half goes to the central government, half comes to the Delhi government. Why isn't the GST being given back if the government is really serious about it? And similarly, why doesn't the central government also pitch in and give back that money if they believe that that vehicular pollution is really the key reason why there is so much of pollution happening in the country or in this region, in the NCR region? Then surely they should be putting as much effort as possible, giving back what they're getting from the industry in terms of taxes, so that the cost of such vehicles come down, and that will obviously make NCR a EV capital for the country.
Dr. Bhattacharya, the role of educating people in terms of adapting and adopting to this new technology, how crucial is that? And what kind of an onus and urgency does the government needs to show, if this global climate crisis is going to get worse?
So, let me start with the last part that you said about the global climate crisis. As a whole, as a public, we'll be crying hoarse about it. But when it comes to putting down the money on the table to purchase something which will lead to lesser emissions, there are very few people who will put that money on the table. So this is, again, as I had mentioned earlier in other of your shows, this is game theoretic completely. Individually, they'll be making optimizations, which as a whole, as a public, does not make sense. So therefore, how do we make sure that what is public good is also followed individually? At the end of the day, it's economics which drives the behavior of individuals. As Amit mentioned, people are anyways buying the two-wheelers because it makes the battery two-wheelers because it makes perfect economic sense. If you look at commercial vehicles, Again, since they're driving over 50,000 kilometers, it makes perfect economic sense to go buy the electric four-wheel taxis, which is what Blue Smart and others are doing. Even Uber has started having the electric taxis because it makes economic sense. But when it comes to individual purchases of, let's say, four-wheelers, it still does not make economic sense. And therefore, as long as the government has pushed the economics to a level where it makes sense to start purchasing for personal consumption electric vehicles, people will automatically do it. In fact, as Gautam mentioned, it's extremely difficult to educate a large number of people, because behavior change is one of the toughest thing to do in a society. So we'll be literally breaking our head if we are trying to attempt and do that where the economics doesn't make sense for each of the individual users. I mean, let's come to the point. You get the cheapest ICU car at about 5 rupees or 5 lakhs on road, whereas the cheapest electric vehicle is 9.25 lakhs on road. So it's almost double of the cheapest ICU, the ICE engine car that you have available. So why will you pay double the amount? There has to be an economic compulsion that will push you towards it. If you're not driving 50, 70,000 kilometers, it just does not make sense to put this upfront money on the table and purchase your vehicle. Obviously, aggregation of transportation is another good way. Also, in terms of electrification of transportation, metro is a great movement forward. But if you look at the last mile connectivity, again, something that Amit's company has been doing and doing extremely well, the challenge is that where will these last mile connectivity drive? There's complete chaos. The urban planning has not catered to it, not just in India for that matter. If you look at Paris, Toronto, Singapore, they have banned the electric scooters, which is not the same as our electric scooters. These are those small scooters which used to go on top of the sidewalk, which used to go on top of the cycling track. We don't even have a sidewalk to begin with, because our last mile could also be walking, but we don't have the ability for people to walk down back to their home. So there's a lot of urban planning that needs to be done. A lot of this is straight at the door of the government. They need to step in and start solving these last mile infrastructure issues. The technology issues will get solved by folks like Yulu and Amit, and there'll be many others who will be coming in and solving it, as long as the public part of it is being done by the government.